turns out I was right all along. So, but it was a failing of mine, not to, but I like that failing. Constantly thinking, it can't be that bad. I'm an optimistic fellow, you might say. And so I think as I was listening to the Kwasi Kwarteng mini budget, I was thinking, well, this sounds absolutely awful, but it can't be that bad. He can't really be essentially almost doing a Sheriff of Nottingham budget. What do you mean? And then I did some sums, and as you know, again, if you're kind enough to listen to this programme on a regular basis, then my mathematical acumen has diminished yearly since I stopped working behind the bar at the London School of Economics. Back then, I could do sums in my head like Carol Vorderman or Rachel Riley to bring things bang up to date. These days, so I did some sums about my own financial situation, and I thought to myself, goodness me, I'll have to get these checked by my teacher or my wife, but Kwasi Kwarteng appears to have just given me thousands and thousands of pounds. At which point I thought, that is awful. And I know what you're thinking, that's all a bit counterintuitive, but it isn't. This is why they have such problems with people like me. Those of us who have benefited from an unfair system, those of us who benefit from policies that we don't think are fair and say so. We are kryptonite to these vampires and ghouls who think that everybody is as selfish and as callous as they are. Empathy is their enemy. Compassion is their curse. They hate us because we can say things like, well, I'm not sure I should be getting any help today. In fact, I'd go further. I'm the last person, well, not the last person. There's plenty of people who are richer than me. But I should not even be in the queue of people getting given money back by Kwasi Kwarteng today, and as it is, I've been given thousands and thousands of pounds. So I'm like, oh my days, this is awful. This is every bit as bad as I feared. And then we spoke to a few people, then we looked at the markets, then we canvassed some expert input, and we took a couple of calls from people who perhaps were trying to put a slightly warmer gloss on things. I'm not sure how successful they were. And you cannot escape the fact that this budget is designed to give me millions of pounds, I wish. Give me thousands of pounds while giving next to nothing to people who are already turning their fridge off or that's a bit extreme. I know some people are doing that, and you shouldn't because you could be storing up a whole heap of other problems. But there's a story in the newspaper today. Don't take my word for it. I shall find it for you like a proper presenter. Families have crossed Sunday roasts, stews and home baking off the menu, and in some cases no longer use their oven as soaring energy costs force big changes in the kitchen. This is 1 in 4, not like 1 in a million, 1 in 4. 25% of home cooks said they were less likely to prepare a roast dinner. Now, how many of them have just been given thousands of pounds by Kwasi Kwarteng? Yeah, correct, none. How many of me have just been given Kwasi Kwarteng thousands of pounds by Kwasi Kwarteng? Yeah. That's right, all of me. So there it is. I mean, that is what he's done. And are you going to make sense of that? I'll tell you how bad things are. Andrea Leadsom's on the telly. I just glanced to my right. Ugh. There she is. Andrea Leadsom, I think, has been... Well, I could be doing her a grave disservice. Maybe she hasn't been sent out to defend it or stick up for it. Maybe she is actually telling the truth and describing it for what it is. An absolute land grab. A Sheriff of Nottingham budget. The opposite of Robin Hood. And not so much stealing from the poor to give to the rich, but giving to the rich. Money that could have gone to the poor. Which is actually stealing from the poor to give to the rich in a way, isn't it? 9 minutes after 12 is the time. Phone lines are open. I'm not sure that I will talk about fracking next. I think the whole country's fracked, actually, after this mini budget. But I've told Keith a few times we should have a badum tish on the programme sound effect, but he thinks it would lower the tone. Also, I'd be stealing Nick Abbott's lunch, and no one should do that. Nick's the absolute don of that kind of radio mischief. But it's up to you. I'll see how the phones go. So you want to carry on with this? And again, straight to the front of the queue if you are getting a plus, if you are seeing something good, something warm, or get Theo back in, recap on the fracking situation and find out how people in areas likely to be affected by fracking, if it goes ahead, which is still unlikely, are feeling about the fact that the manifesto pledge from the Conservative Party that in the red wall you quite possibly voted for has now been thrown under the bus along with you. And thank you to Stephen for reminding me that it is now Dame Andrea Led. Is it really? You are winding me up. 12 after 10, or even 10 after 12. It's one or the other. Wayne's in Kingsbridge. Wayne, how's it going?
That's all good, I suppose.
Carry on.
I won't complain, but putting circles in squares and slices is my job.
We know this. Wayne is the pizza king of Kingsbridge.
Something like that. We've seen over the past few months, and it has been a few months, customers are spending less, particularly those who are obviously earning less. So if I say 100 of my customers a week are spending between £5 and £10 a week, and you, James, are customer 101, you're going to spend between £500 and £1,000 more on one pizza order to make up for the difference.
Listen, I don't know whether you're planning on using me in some marketing campaign or something like that.
Not at all.
I'm sure your pizza is delicious. That'd look good on the van. I'm sure your pizza is... I asked Hugh Grant to read one of my books in search of a quote, and he was very polite. He replied and said, I'm far too busy, but I'm sure it's wonderful. And I said, can I use that? I'm far too busy, but I'm sure it's wonderful on the cover. That'd be the same as me. So I'm sure your pizza is delicious. No, obviously, and that's a really good point. And this is what I was trying to push the other fella on, the one in the jacuzzi, Faraz, on the question of how will that actually help ordinary workers, and he was very close to admitting it's not meant to help ordinary workers, except insofar as allegedly keeping them in work.
Exactly, but it doesn't, because we are losing £500 to £1,000 of pre-pandemic expected earnings a week from our regular customers. And that's, of course, ignoring those who were already struggling to make ends meet, but were having their pizzas as a once-a-week or once-a-month treat, that they now simply can't afford to do that. Yet the customers who can afford to do it, they're not now spending £20 or £30 more than what they were before, because, in all honesty, there's only really so much that you can eat in a meal, and you're not going to really go and spend out a load of money on extra stuff if you're not going to eat it. And that's where our industry will find an issue with this, and we've been finding it for months. Really good point. And it's just going to be impounded now because of this. And we aren't going to see the people who earn a fortune around in our neck of the woods, which I don't know how many people there are, but they're not going to turn around and go, right, guys, we've got a load of money. I'm going to get, instead of having the medium pizza that I've got 2 slices left of, the old 12-inch one, 2 slices left for the next day for breakfast, I'm going to have a 15-inch pizza because I can afford it now, because there's still only so big a belly.
It's not going to happen. And as with pizza customers, so with actual workforces, because this idea that it's going to stimulate growth in a workforce that's pretty much at full capacity is ridiculous. So just as you're not going to suddenly generate more pizzas to sell to a smaller number of people because they've got more money, where are all these people going to come from that are going to be doing the jobs that are designed to stimulate the growth that is going to be created by letting the corporations keep more of their profits? We've got pretty much full employment. Going to be wheeling pensioners back into the workforce and claiming that they're going to be able to rejuvenate the entire economy.
Absolutely. Of course, that's what we're going to do. Yeah, brilliant idea. Fantastic. What we're also seeing as well, though, James, is that the products that customers are not buying are things that they can buy cheaper in supermarkets. So we're not selling the cans of Coke.
No, of course not. So I'll get the pizza. I'll get the pizza delivered, but I'll get the ice cream and the Coke from Budgeons.
We are still doing the same level of work in terms of cooking the pizzas and doing the deliveries and all of that element of the business.
Yeah.
But all of the things that we have zero labour cost really in selling, we no longer do. So every element of our sales is now the labour-intensive stuff, whereas we were able to make money on soft drinks, on ice creams, on things that we don't have to put any labour into. And then we've now got to think, what can we now do? I cannot make my staff work any harder than they already do. There's only so many pizza bases that one person can make in a day. There's only so many.
So that's growth, isn't it? You can't stimulate growth by doing more. You can only stimulate growth by having more customers, and you can't have more customers when they're worse off than they were last week. You do, however, get to keep more of your profits because of the cut in corporation tax, but those profits are already smaller than they would have been, or than they were, as you say, considerably smaller than they were before pandemic. So it's better than that, but worse than what it would have been, if as it were.
Yes. Small wins, eh?
Small wins indeed. I'm going to have one of these pizzas one day, Wayne. I don't get to Devon. I used to get to Devon quite a lot. I don't know where exactly Kingsbridge is. We used to get down towards Croyd, around Saunton Sands and stuff like that.
We're right down at the south.
Yes. Well, next time I'm... Go on.
We've got Salcombe near us. It's a perfect place to come and spend a day, but the problem is I might not have the staff to be able to do it, so you might have to come in and do everything yourself.
Do you not have a VIP lane? For me and Keith. Stay safe. Is it Planet Pizza, if I remembered correctly?
other way around.
Pizza Planet.
Close enough.
That's not bad, though. Pizza Planet in Kingsbridge. Get yourself down there. 12:15 is the time. 18 minutes after 12 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where it is a sort of unprecedented day. I'll tell you how unprecedented it is. Lewis Goodall has just breezed into the studio at one of our new...
I got the call, James, and I just came straight away.
Summon the Goodall. As with most of my guests today, Lewis, I've said sort of fill your boots, really. Don't wait for a zinging question. But the politics of it, we've done a lot on the economics of it. The politics of it is almost as unprecedented as the numbers.
So, James, I've long thought that the different thing about Liz Truss is, and the defining characteristic of her as a politician is about will. She thinks that she can, in a way that Boris Johnson never did, use her will to try and sort of recreate the political success the Conservatives had in the 1980s. Her diagnosis is that Boris Johnson's Conservatives were so mushy and ill-defined and were being dragged and buffeted all over the place politically. And if she exerts a sort of cast-iron will that exerts and creates core Conservative principles, she can drag the debate from what she perceives as being too far on the left, right back to the right and back to the 1980s. The problem with that is it sort of ignores three things. Two things on the politics. Well, first of all, 2008 happened, which changed the political debate in this country about sort of Thatcherism and free markets. And 2019 happened when the Conservative Party created a coalition of voters, which, as you know, listeners and all know, I don't need to go on about, but, you know, created a very different sort of coalition with the Tory party than it had before. And this was a sort of budget, let's just call it a budget, that almost it was as if that had never happened, that it was a sort of 2010 to 2015 plus, but without the fiscal sort of probity and so on. And the economic thing that it's sort of ignoring is that what we're seeing with sterling and with gilts and borrowing.
Would they not have known that was going to happen? Or is that, again, they would have just believed that it was? It reminded me of Brexit. I know what you'll say. Everything reminds me of Brexit. But this idea that you can believe a solution to the Northern Ireland problem, you can believe it's not unique to Truss, but it is. They must have known that the gilts and sterling were going to respond in the way that they've responded.
I think sometimes when the government has been in office for a long time, and as I say, it comes back to
this. Sort of. It's only been a fortnight.
Well, that's true, yeah, but that's true. Well, it feels like a long time. You know, I think, again, it comes back to that central thing about Liz Truss and will.
Yeah.
She believes that the fundamental problem for the Conservative Party over a long time is that it has not been brave enough on all sorts of issues. And you're seeing that on issue after issue. So that was fracking yesterday. It doesn't really matter that the reason that David Cameron didn't go for it, or Boris Johnson didn't go for it, is because they saw, well, I would quite like to do this, but the political benefit and economic benefit is so desultory, it's so small, it's just not worth the political cost. Truss doesn't see things that way. She thinks, I think partly it's because what she thinks about Margaret Thatcher and the lessons of the 1980s, she thinks she's learned is that, you know, Margaret Thatcher sort of fought battles on every front, and that's how she was successful. Now, the truth is it's a lot more complicated and nuanced than that, but I think that is the kind of cardinal lesson that she's applying to everything, correct.
Which explains why they'd come into this with a determination to not let, for example, the OBR have a look in.
Well, yeah.
Because they would have provided some...
I think there are two reasons for that. One is that, look, I think they've probably got an eye to sterling and the gilt markets, although actually that's probably spooked them more, not having those that transparency. But also, normally with a budget, you get the full distribution analysis, which shows how much the poor are being affected by each particular thing and the policies in the round, and how much the rich. And it's broken down by decile, so it breaks down the population in terms of wealth into 10%
so you
chunks.
Can see exactly what's going to happen to you.
Absolutely. So you can see who's going to get the benefit. Now, this is another reason why, interestingly enough, it's a big break with, never mind Thatcherism, break with, say, David Cameron and George Osborne, because obviously there was huge controversy at that time around austerity and the impact of austerity and so on. But interestingly, even Cameron and Osborne always looked through the lens of saying, well, if you take our changes in the round, because we're making a lot of changes to how much tax the poor pay, if you look at everything in the round, overall, the rich are actually paying most and the poor are benefiting most. Not on any individual thing, but if you take the policies all together, that will not be the case with this sector. No, not at all.
Which leads to my final question. What do you think the papers are going to do tomorrow?
It's really interesting. I don't know. It's because the truth is, and you can say whether it's fair or not.
Yeah.
Clearly, in one way, it's not fair. The Conservative Party enjoys enormous latitude on fiscal matters by comparison to the Labour Party. If the Labour Party did this, we never mind the gilt markets and sterling or whatever. The sort of reaction would be extraordinary.
There'd be effigies burning in the streets.
Well, I mean, it would be, the reaction would be profound. I mean, I said yesterday going into this that yes, the Conservative Party always enjoys tremendous latitude from the markets and from the press on fiscal matters, but it felt like Kwasi Kwarteng was going to push that latitude to its upper limits. And I think by the end of the day, we'll find out how much they've pushed it on the economic front with the markets, and tomorrow morning we'll find out how much they've pushed it on the media side with the papers.
That is going to be, and also without those deciles, the distributive analysis that you described, the papers won't be able to do their pound in your pocket type of coverage.
No, although there will be groups that do it. So the Institute for Fiscal Studies are going to do it. The Resolution Foundation will do it. So that's the thing. I mean, in a way, it's kind of just because the government doesn't do it. There are some very clever people and very talented economists out there who will do it. So it's a sort of.
So they can't dodge the bullet.
The bullet comes. It just comes slightly from a different source.
Change the calibre.
Yeah.
What else are you up to? Your capacious portfolio. Are you back on air later today?
Yeah, back on air at 7:00 today, and we're doing the Newsagents podcast, which I'm going to go and record right now. And I can see they're messaging me saying, "Where are you?" And I'm saying, "Well, I'm with James O'Brien."
That's right. That won't wash.
I couldn't resist the call.
That won't wash. That won't cut any mustard with Mateless. Off you go. Thank you very much indeed, Lewis Goodall, who a relatively new member of the LBC family, but as you can tell, he's fitted right in, and you can hear him presenting his own programme at 7:00 this evening, and indeed alongside John Sopel and Emily Mateless on the new Newsagents podcast. Back to the switchboard. Mark is in Oxford. Mark, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, good afternoon, James.
Hello, Mark.
I feel compelled to call in. I am one of these people that are benefiting hugely from today's announcement. I'm appalled by it, quite frankly. I know you see in the supermarkets your celebrations and Quality Street, but Christmas has really come early for me, and it's disgusting. I don't need...
So you can't see any... and the point is that, like me, you're looking at other people. You can't. In a way, I almost envy the ability to not really notice or care about anybody else, because let's not kid ourselves. It's always nice to come out better off from a budget than you went into it. But the minute you remember the existence of the rest of the country, all of the gloss is knocked off that feeling.
Exactly.
Right.
And one of the main things here as well is it's not just the poorest this is affecting. This is middle earners. If you're on £45,000 of good income, you're still struggling. You're still struggling to pay your bills. And, I don't need these taxes. I could handle a 6% increase in my corporation tax. I pay myself dividends. I'm happy to pay the extra tax. I do not need these cuts. Now, the difference is I come from a working class background and not privately educated, and so I'm not that way inclined. But I'm in absolute despair.
Well, hang on. I am privately educated. I'm exactly the same way inclined as you are, and so are a lot of my pals.
well, I haven't heard many call-ins so far.
No, fair enough.
It's just, if we want better schools, we want to help our police force.
We'll clutch that straw. We'll clutch that straw for a final time. The logic, the calculation, the belief. I think Lewis's analysis of this notion of belief being a powerful factor in the whole setup now is irresistible. But the idea that let's try and think back to what the earlier caller was telling us. You get to keep more of your profits, pay less in corporation tax, and therefore you're likely to hire more people, perhaps, or at least your business is going to be more robust than it would have been otherwise. Is there anything we can get there that's a little bit more upbeat?
For myself personally, no. So I work for myself as an IT consultant.
Right.
So it is solely benefiting me. The only small benefit I can see is when we talk about this nonsense of trickle-down economics. For me, there is some evidence of that, because I will go to the restaurant. I will go and buy extra in the shop.
Okay, yeah.
But they're a big corporation that, has got thousands of employees that are saving on that. They're not going to be giving their staff extra income or increase their salaries. So that trickle down isn't going to happen.
And you're not going to buy that much more. This is the point Wayne was making.
Exactly.
If you were one of his regulars,
yes,
you can only eat one pizza.
Exactly. And I think, it's for me, this is just a ploy to get people similar to myself that have voted Conservative in the past. Unfortunately, I voted Brexit, which I regret terribly. But it's aimed at people that were footballification, people in my bracket, to keep voting for them. And I see through this, and they will not be getting my vote.
I don't think there are enough of you. That's the other bit about it. 629,000. I mean, you're talking about corporation tax rather than the top rate of income tax. But anyway, Mark, I'm just going to read you this, actually, because it's been a surprisingly jolly show today, despite the bleakness of the landscape we've been examining. Susanna's texted in while you were talking to say, James, what a lovely person you have on the phone right now. And that's you, Mark.
Oh.
He's blushing. Listen, it's a radio blush. We're making history.
Definitely.
Look after yourself, mate. And have a great weekend. We'll have the Brexit conversation next time. 12:28 is the time you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We've done that thing again where I could have come in at 10 to 10 this morning instead of slaving over a hot newspaper trying to find things that we would have to talk about. We've sort of run from beginning to end on the same subjects. And there was something yesterday I really wanted to do with you that is light relief. The 10, I got not complaints. Complaints is a bit harsh, but the 10 things that all parents pledge they won't do or will do, and then these pledges fall by the wayside with every passing nappy change. I'll give you the 5 now, the bottom 5 now, and the top 5 after the news headlines. All right, like a proper grown-up presenter doing a hook and tease. Yeah, ready? Okay. So at 10, my kids will have good manners at all times. Number 9, establishing a good bedtime routine will be easy. I think my kids will never throw tantrums in public. To be honest, it's the other way around in our house. I will never say, because I said so. That lasted about 3 years with us. And my kids will never sleep in my bed. You should be allowed at brackets unless they're really poorly on there. So that's the bottom 5. What do you think the top 5 parental pledges that are almost always broken are? Find out after the very latest news headlines with Tim Humphrey. It is 12:33 and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Those other 5 I'll read to my kids every night. These are the good intentions that all parents break. I'm smug enough already. I'm not going to tell you which ones on here actually don't apply to us, but I just thought you'd be amused by the general consensus. I will never bribe my children. Yeah, fail on that one. I will never use a tablet as a babysitter. Used to say that on air, do you remember? We'd play I Spy. Or Mini Cheddar. It's a good game, Mini Cheddar, actually. Remind me to tell you the rules of Mini Cheddar. We'd never put them in and then I think we drove to Spain one year, and the idea of having 2 little iPads, like cheap versions on the back of the car seat in front so they could watch cartoons. Yeah, I did do that in the end. I won't shout at my child. I've been very good at that, actually. And screen time will be limited. Actually, I'm going to allow myself a bit of a pat on the back there for once. Done pretty good on those. 12:34 is the time. It's my screen time that's the problem in our house, indeed, and the tantrums in public. Seriously, the kids are great. It's me they have to worry about. I've still got time for a few more calls. The number you need is 03456060973. I tell you what I'll do, though, before I speak to Tony and Dave. Let me nudge it along ever so slightly. And what do you think they're playing at? Because no one really has managed to explain it in a way that challenges Lewis Goodall's analysis of Liz Truss just believing. She thinks that belief is a more powerful entity than epistemology, than evidence, than statistics, facts, experience. It's belief. She can believe this great will. It's a bit like cosplaying Margaret Thatcher. I know that's a lazy analysis of Liz Truss, but to be fair, she did actually dress up as her quite a few times during the leadership campaigns. But this Iron Lady mythology. Thatcher was a details person. I'm not an admirer of most of her policies or much of her policies, but the idea that she achieved things through force of will is just historically bogus. It's just factually untrue. She did not achieve things through force of will. She brought conference to its feet by saying, "You turn if you want to. The lady's not for turning." She brought conference to its feet, but in cabinet, she was a great one for collective responsibility. And not that, that's why Heseltine had to walk out ultimately. So, what do you think they're playing at? Quasi Quartain, Chris suggests, has brought us back to that line that we reflected upon very wryly often during Boris Johnson's handling of the coronavirus crisis. Some of you may die, but it's a sacrifice I am willing to make. Which is, of course, Prince Farquhar from Shrek, isn't it? 12:36 is the time. So give us a call if you fancy it. We've been very short of women again today. Seriously, it's like my teenage years all over again. Tony's in Exeter. Tony, what would you like to say?
You asked, what do I think they're playing at? And,
yeah, but you were already waiting to talk to me on that. That's a bit quick off the old mark.
I was. But I believe that the big picture here is the reality the economy is going to get worse during the next 2 years.
Yes.
The mortgage rates are going to continue to rise. Bank of England only raised interest rates by 0.5% yesterday. They're going to go up more and considerably more. So that means that although the government will announce that the majority will be a little bit better off, obviously those at the top a lot better off, but the majority will come home tonight and say, I've got all the children and I'm trying to be a good parent, as you've illustrated, around my feet. What has actually the budget done for me today? They'll look at the press and they'll say, if I'm on 30,000 a year, I'm going to be a little bit better off. Oh, that's good. Put it to bed. Forget about it. But I'm okay. The government are on my side. They're making me a little bit better off. We'll see what the party conferences come forward with.
But they're not, though. They're going to be looking at the bankers' bonuses. They're going to be looking at the income tax cuts for the richest people in the country. Or you think they're going to look at everything entirely exclusively through the lens of their own immediate experience?
Unfortunately, not everyone does the level of thinking and analysis.
I'm always a bit uncomfortable with this, and I don't know if I would argue with you. It's just always a little jarring to hear it out loud. But everybody's looking at the other side of the river, I think, generally.
I think they are, but when they go into, and where I'm getting to is when at the end of the party conferences, Liz Truss will think, how's it going? It's going to get a lot worse, I know that, next year. I've only got 2 years to run. I'll go now. I'll go to the country now, get 5 years then under my belt when I can be unpopular. She's saying I don't mind being unpopular. This is actually now about branding what they're doing. It's a new era, a new approach, new government. Even the BBC were talking about the new government have been in place for 17 days yesterday. Well, that's absolutely nonsense, of course. It's 12 years.
Well, it's both. You know, it's both. I mean, Lewis said that as well, so it's easily done. But it's a new prime minister, but the same party. I just don't think that I mean, you may well be thinking that that's what they're planning. It's Farquhar with a D. I thought I said that.
I think they've...
Sorry, not you. I'm sorry, Tony. I'm moving on now. I meant that the little reference to Shrek that I made a moment ago. Otherwise, that would be a bit of a non sequitur. No, the point I was going to make was that the cost of living crisis is still on the horizon, albeit that they've nibbled at the edges of it. That's what people are going to be thinking about as they sit in front of the television with the children frolicking at their feet, I think. 12:39 is the time. Dave and Harrow up next, but before that, Theo Oswald is back.
You wanted a full report on fracking?
Yes. Oh, we'll do that after Dave.
Fine.
Carry on, Dave.
Hi, James.
Hello, Dave.
I've called in with a potential benefit, actually, from these announcements. I'll do well myself, but I'm a finance director for a multinational company.
Yeah.
And I largely think it's a bad idea, to be honest, but when I look at some of the benefits, the national insurance price tax does apply to employers as well. So it made it more expensive for us to employ people in the UK versus France, America, Belgium, etc. And reverting it isn't a massive reversion, but we have, with that and the devaluation in the pound versus the dollar, started to talk about the UK as a middle-cost country versus being a high-cost country.
That's interesting.
And
that's what he's banking on. That's a brilliant analysis that's the best we've had all day. That is what the gamble is. And you know what I have to do now is lob a few rotten tomatoes at it. Who are these people? who are these people you're going to hire in a country that's pretty much at full employment?
So it's not necessarily hiring immediately. Now, this is potentially a bit of an issue. It's more about where do we lose people and where do we pick them up later on. So when we transfer jobs, we look at France and Belgium, for example, and go, God, they're really expensive. The US, really expensive. So they're the first targets to look at when we look at moving work over to India, for example. If you sit in the middle the middle cost country bracket, yeah, you're not great, but you're not.
You're better than them over there.
Exactly.
That is. I mean, that is the beginning, middle, and end of the positive analysis that we've managed to stumble across today.
Pretty much, I think, yeah.
Well, fingers crossed. Can I ask what sector you're in? You don't have to tell me, just out of curiosity.
I'm in technology software.
Okay. So, I mean, it's service, essentially, isn't it? Even though there's a product there.
It is all service. They're pretty sort of middle and high paid individuals. There's no sort of, well, very few, 20k, 25k employees on the payroll, but there are hundreds of them, to be fair.
No, I get it.
Multinational companies.
I mean, I think you are the target. I think you are the target. I think that is exactly what he's talking about. And listen, it would be unpatriotic not to hope that there are loads and loads of Daves out there working for companies like Dave's, describing scenarios like Dave's. I mean, it really would be unpatriotic to hope, not to hope that. I mean, we'll have to wait and see. Thank you, Dave. That was, in many ways, the most upbeat and positive call that we've taken all day. And for that, I'm genuinely grateful. Because as I discussed earlier, I this desire not to believe that things are quite as bad as they seem to be is Theo Ushwood.
To bring you that fracking full report that you wanted. So Jacob Rees-Mogg announced the lifting of the moratorium on fracking yesterday. But the start of his answer to an urgent question in the House of Commons didn't go quite to plan.
But he's a brilliant parliamentary performer.
I am having some difficulty in finding the right page immediately. But don't worry. Don't worry.
Order. Secretary of State. Is there another copy we can send through?
Sir Lindsay Hoyle to the rescue there, but of course...
He's very good, though, on efficiency and workers, isn't he, Rees-Mogg, and ordering them not to work from home and talking about productivity. And that was Rees-Mogg turning up in the House of Commons without his notes.
So that opened the door, of course, to Ed Miliband, the Shadow Business Secretary, to make his point, particularly focusing on what the Conservative manifesto was back in 2019.
I look forward to him and his colleagues explaining his charter for earthquakes to the people of Lancashire, Yorkshire, the Midlands, Sussex, Dorset and indeed Somerset, who will be part of his dangerous experiment. Let me tell the party opposite. We will hang this broken promise round their necks in every part of the country between now and the next general election.
Jacob Rees-Mogg then moved on to insulting his own MPs.
Bringing on this supply will bring us cheaper energy, which we need. That will help our constituents. It secures our supply, which will ensure that our businesses can continue to operate whatever the weather. This is of such importance, and it is sheer Ludditery, Mr. Speaker, that opposes it.
Well, Benson.
There's nothing Luddite about the people of Lancashire or of Fylde.
That was Mark Menzies, the Conservative MP for Fylde, which is just south of Blackpool. Another Conservative MP who was very unhappy was Mark Fletcher, who represents Bolsover in Derbyshire.
Speaker, I've listened carefully to the Secretary of State, and I have to say the local consent plans don't seem to wash. It seems to come back to communities being bought off rather than having a vote. So can the Secretary of State confirm once and for all if local residents across Bolsover who are concerned about fracking will get a vote to object to these schemes locally?
That was Mark Fletcher asking the question, which was asked on 8 separate occasions, about what mechanism is going to be in place so that local people... By Tories. Yeah. What mechanism is going to be in place so that local people, if they don't want a fracking well in their constituency, can actually stop it happening? Now, you might have thought a parliamentary performer would then at this point take their foot off the accelerator, step back, not continue to apply the pressure, but not Mr. Rees-Mogg. He stuck to his guns and accused his opponents of being in the pay of Vladimir Putin.
And I'm well aware that there have been objections to fracking, but I would also note that there have been stories widely reported that some of the opposition to fracking has been funded by Mr. Putin's regime.
So just going back to that point that Mark Fletcher was making, what mechanism is in place? Is there going to be a special button that local people can push, a petition even, potentially, to stop their fracking well happening? Well, actually, Simon Clarke, the Levelling Up Secretary, on LBC today, just said they're going to be the normal planning rules.
Oh.
On fracking, we are very, very clear that we will have the usual consent provisions which apply to any application for the extraction of oil or gas, and that local communities will have their say, and ultimately it will be their decision where the fracking goes ahead. It will take place through the normal planning application process.
Now, it might be news to you, James, but do you know that every single day planning applications which people oppose still get approved?
Of course
they still go ahead.
Yes.
People might say they don't want their neighbour putting up a very large conservatory. It can still go ahead. People might say they don't want a new shopping centre. It can still go ahead. There's nothing special going by what Mr. Clark told LBC earlier to say that local people have any possibility of actually stopping a planning well from being drilled in their constituency. And of course, that was a key part.
Because there could be a huge level of objection and it will still go ahead. That's the point you're making. So this is not reassuring to people at all. And it's a massive manifesto breach.
Because, of course, the manifesto was explicit in saying there would be no fracking wells without public consent.
Do you know there's a charity called Human Relief, the Human Relief Foundation, that spent 30 years focused entirely on aid to the world's poorest countries? It's just opened a food bank in Birmingham. Gordon Brown tells us this morning. In fact, I'd urge you to read Gordon Brown's Twitter thread today if you need a little reminder of what grown-ups sound like or look like. The opposite of which. Do you want to know something about Jacob Rees-Mogg?
Go on.
That's not a word. Ludditism.
Ludditry?
No, it would be Luddism. Would be
Luddism,
yeah. So, this idea that someone who's as thick as mince can sound intellectual by talking in a voice that's been nicked from the crypt.
I did do a tweet and I got the the squiggly red line underneath which said it was a spelling error.
It's not a word. It's Luddism. Everyone knows it's Luddism. Everyone vaguely educated. I wonder if it's too late for his parents to get a refund on the school fees. It's 12:47. It is 10 minutes to 1, and let's talk to Sarah, and then I think I'll read you that thread from Gordon Brown in its entirety, actually, because well, as I said, it's a nice reminder of what a grown-up looks like. Sarah is in Bromley. Sarah, what made you pick up the phone?
I am very, very, very alarmed that when I was in early 1980s,
yes.
I was a lending bank manager.
Okay.
I just graduated. And one of the things that was very obvious was when people got into real financial difficulties, they stopped looking. They shut their eyes. They're equivalent to maxed out their credit cards. And they hope for the best.
Yeah.
And for me, what I'm seeing is somebody maxing out our credit card. And if you max your credit card out and anything happens, you're paying huge rates of interest. You can't ever pay it back, or you go bankrupt.
You're talking about the government.
I'm talking about the government maxing out our credit cards.
No, I understand. I'm just clarifying for people listening. Comparing them to people in the early 80s as recession began to bite, who just sort of sank below the waterline with their eyes closed.
Absolutely. And they went bankrupt. And it was, at that stage, you watched because banks weren't like they are now.
No.
And it was horrible to watch. But so people stopped opening the envelopes. I mean, it didn't open the email.
Because there was no light at the end of the tunnel. They just thought, well, let's see, this will soon pass, this will pass. Let's find out what happens. They lost their houses, they lost their livelihoods, an awful lot of people. I mean, I'm going to bite off Dave's arm with the last call who just explained that it might make the UK marginally more attractive to some companies in some sectors than it was previously. But
that's like winning the lottery.
Yeah.
If you
well, that's a good thing,
buy a lotto ticket, you might win the lottery.
True.
But what are the odds?
Yeah. And also, it's not really an economic policy. There's a Kwasi Kwarteng stood up today and said, well, we're going to borrow a ton of money and we're going to buy loads of scratch cards. And how can you tell us that's a bad idea? Because there are scratch cards out there which will give you, 30 grand a month for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
That's what he's done, isn't it? He spent it all on scratch cards.
And may we get one?
Who borrows money to buy scratch cards? People in all sorts of trouble.
People who are in trouble do, and it's one of the things that's really scary. And when I was very young, the IMF came in because we went bust.
Yes, sovereignty, eh?
Yeah.
Thank you. That was really upbeat. I might rechristen you Chuckles, if that's all right with you.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. Oh, you can't help it. I mean, not you can't help it. We can't help it. It's the way the cookie crumbles. A quick word on the passing of Hilary Mantel, as reported in the news earlier. I mean, a truly shining light. It's really sad, that. deaths of public figures you've never met get you, and some deaths of public figures you've never met tend not to get you quite as much. But Hilary Mantel was such an adornment to not just the literary firmament, but society in general. And I just, apropos Hilary Mantel, may she rest in peace, I interviewed Ian McEwan not long ago, and I was toying with the idea while interviewing him. I can't remember whether it came up or not. You'll have to listen to Full Disclosure to check, of whether or not I could call him Britain's greatest living novelist. And I know that in my internal dialogue, I would have been going, yeah, Hilary Mantel. And Hilary's no longer with us, which means Ian now has a greater claim to being Britain's greatest living novelist. Here he is talking to me a few weeks ago, although the Full Disclosure interview is released today, about, well, you know how Full Disclosure works. We're talking to me about life, the universe and everything, but also about his new book, his brilliant new book, Lessons.
I remember once, years ago, I was just publishing my first book or two, and I made friends with Philip Roth.
Yes.
And he said to me, he said, can I give you a piece of advice? He said, you must always write as if your parents are dead. Yeah. And I always thought that was absolutely right. But in fact, what he really said was, you must almost write, assuming your parents are alive, that they're dead. In other words, you must raid your past and never care a thing about whom you offend.
Which is brutal.
It's absolutely brutal. So I've not followed his advice. Both my parents are dead.
Which is why they appear unvarnished in the new book.
My mother with a burden of sadness, my father with a very complex character. So that was the kind of liberty that perhaps I've been waiting for, sort of half-consciously, to take.
I get that. And because, I mean, people confused by Roth's advice, if anybody is, I mean, it's a question of conscience, really, isn't it? It's because you hurt people when you write about them in distinctly recognisable terms.
Philip had that chip of ice on iceberg proportion.
Yes. I remember the chip of ice that all writers have to have. You've described yours as slushy.
Mine's a bit slushy. I keep waiting for it to harden up a bit.
Ian McEwan, the guest on this week's Full Disclosure, which you can find wherever you get your podcast, Global Player. App being my portal of choice. I'm probably going to apologise to Gina, who's in Colchester, because I do want to read out this Gordon Brown. That's with me complaining about not having enough women on the programme all day. And now here I am spurning Gina, because I want to read out this thread from Gordon Brown, because, I don't know, I find it oddly reassuring. Having been promised an energy price freeze, millions will be shocked when hit with a 25% rise in fuel bills in October. 5 million kids risk being pushed into poverty, with charities having to stop feeding the hungry so they can help the starving. We have to act. After a summer of doing nothing, the government has finally done nowhere near enough. Things are so bad that Human Relief, which has spent 30 years focused entirely on aid to the world's poorest countries, has opened a food bank in Birmingham. In June, Rishi Sunak gave households on universal credit £1,200 a year for fuel bills, but he'd already taken £1,000 a year from them, while benefits rose by just 3.1% as inflation hit 10%. Once the October fuel bills land, this will leave them £1,450 a year worse off. The low-paid get just £550 in government help, despite facing £1,300 rises in fuel bills, not to mention other costs. Families with more than 2 children are even worse off, as the flat rate payment gives them just £2.60 a week per person for a couple with 3 kids. It's no longer the welfare state that's the last line of defence, but charities, and yet charities find themselves broke. Compassion isn't running out, but cash is. Churches are worried that they won't be able to afford to heat their halls for those who cannot heat their homes. The reversal of the national insurance rise will give £1,800 to the richest and just £7.66 a year to the poorest. The gap between rich and poor continues to widen as the government lavishes billions on the already wealthy at the expense of the new poor. The removal of the banker's bonus cap, corporation tax cuts, and the rejection of a further windfall tax will mercilessly underline that a winter of destitution is coming for millions, not because we are a poor country, but because we are an ever more unequal one. The coming battle must be against poverty, not against the poor. You cannot rely on a heartless government having a change of heart, but concerted action by the public can force a change of mind. The time for action is now. And Gordon Brown invites you to sign a petition calling for a proper emergency budget that boosts universal credit and addresses some of the issues raised in that scintillating and heartbreaking thread. You have been listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where approximately 2.5 hours ago, I suggested to you that I couldn't quite believe what I'd heard and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to say. Well, I still can't quite believe what I heard, but I'm somewhat relieved that I found something to say. Here's Sheila Fogarty.
And I hope I can find more to say. Thanks, James. 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 Find more to say. Thanks.
Chào em, hoa cười hương sắc tươi xinh, anh đem cả tâm chân tình chào em. Hoa cười hương sắc tươi xinh, anh đem cả tâm chân tình chào em.